Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. It's the end of June. We've been through a heat wave. The garden has changed a lot, so let's take a look. Now, before we head into the garden, I wanted to take a look at these beds in the front of the garden. If you remember my last garden tour, these looked very different. So I mentioned in that tour that I was planning to plant some blueberry bushes. You can see that my blueberry bushes arrived. They're very small, but that is expected. And I've planted 7 blueberry bushes along the edge of the garden here. You can see that we still have the mint. I'm letting that stay, but I did cut it back quite a bit. And you can see this oregano that we harvested together not that long ago has, not suffering at all from the harvest. It's really large and beautiful. And something's been digging here, so we'll keep an eye on that. I did plant kind of on a whim. In between all the blueberries that I planted, I did stick a couple little zinnia seeds. These blueberry bushes, of course, will be really small this year. I thought it would look pretty to have some zinnias right in front of the garden. Now, of course, they're outside the fence, so I'm taking a little bit of a risk that deer or bunnies or whatever could come munch on them. But I had extra seeds, so I figured it was worth a little bit of a risk to throw them in the ground and see what happens. Also, since I did plant them late June, we probably won't get blooms from those until very late summer, maybe even early fall. But I figured we'll get some, last minute blooms as kind of a last hurrah before frost, which I don't even want to think about frost yet. So we're just going to move on and not talk about that. So over here, the other side, you can see the blueberries here, and my little zinnias are coming up. So I planted 2 different blueberry varieties in front here. I have a handful of blueberry bushes already over by my mostly ornamental fire pit garden, and I chose the 2 varieties that seem to be the most successful. I figured that they must like my area the best. So I planted those varieties along this wall here. I do recognize that probably it would be ideal for them to have a little more space, to be spaced away from the wall a little bit, or from the fence a little bit. So we'll see how they do. Everything. If you stick around my channel for a while, you'll find out that the majority of what I do in the garden is an experiment. But, usually those experiments yield at least some delicious results. So I'm hoping this one will be the same. Let's head on into the garden and take a look at what has changed in here. So as we head over this way, you can see my flowers have started blooming. They're really just in early stages, but look at this zinnia. This is the Benares Giant, not coral, salmon rose color, and I think it's really beautiful. There is a coral variety that I considered, but I ended up choosing the salmon rose. And my cosmos is starting to bloom. I'm really loving this lemon gem marigold. This one is just beautiful and covered with blooms. You can see that my zucchinis here are starting to grow a little bit. These are pretty small. I do have some larger ones in another area of the garden. I believe, if I'm remembering right, I think these are the long white of Palermo zucchinis. And then in another area of the garden, I have another variety. And so here you can see my tomatoes. Now, I did mention in the container garden tour that I filmed a few days ago, you may have already seen that my garden is significantly behind this year. We had a very cold, basically the entire month of May was cold, and the first little bit of June was cold too. So we didn't get any frost or anything like that. So my plants are, they're still alive. But usually at this point in the season, I'd be harvesting my first cherry tomatoes around now, and I would have usually quite a few green slicer tomatoes. They wouldn't be ready to harvest for a few more weeks, but normally I would have quite a few of decent size. And as we go through this garden, you'll see that that is not the case this year, which my plants, for the most part seem pretty healthy. I have been battling some disease this year, which I mentioned, and you'll see some signs of that throughout this garden tour. So disease is not really anything that is new to me. Here in Connecticut, even though it's a cooler climate, we do have pretty high humidity in the summer. And so I do struggle with tomato disease pretty much every year. But this year started a little bit earlier. Now, we'll talk about that a little more as we get to it and we see signs of it. So now that we've finally had some warm weather, I'm hoping that these tomatoes will catch up quickly. You can see we've got flowers, not a huge amount of flowers, but we are getting some. But there's definitely a lack of tomato fruits. Now over here, you can see a few more lovely flowers. I've got some poppies that are kind of draping along here. So the flowers I find tend to start off a little bit slow. You can see just 1 or 2 flowers per plant, but I find that as the season goes on, these will catch up and be lovely. We've got another zinnia here and some more poppies that haven't started flowering yet. So a couple more cosmos here. So this should be really lovely as these fill in and really get going. Now over here, my potatoes are not looking great. Potatoes do tend to die back around the time that it's time to harvest, but I don't think that these are ready to harvest yet. I think it's more likely in the case of these potatoes that they're actually dealing with stress. You know, they've had a pretty rough start in life. They have been nibbled on by something basically since I set them in the garden. And I'm not really anticipating a big harvest, but I'm going to let them go and we're going to see what happens as the season goes on. Now mixed in with the potatoes, you can see we've got some flowers, some cosmos here, tiny little poppy over there. This is a snapdragon that has not bloomed yet and a cosmos that has not bloomed yet. So I planted some bush beans. I planted just a little row of bush beans along the front here. Not all of them germinated, but quite a few of them did. So should be a nice little extra harvest. And you can see I've got a pretty zinnia there. This flower's on its way out. So I should pick this off and then encourage more blooming. With a lot of annual flowers, especially ones that are often grown in the vegetable garden, by removing the first few blooms, especially, you know, I let this bloom. This bloom is kind of dying back naturally. But I'm going to go ahead and pinch this off now that it's on its way out, and that will encourage the plant to produce more blooms. So the plant is basically trying to produce seeds and just know that it's done its job to ensure that the generation of zinnias will continue. So by removing the flower before it has a chance to really set seeds, I'm telling the plant that it needs to keep working on its goal and it should produce more flowers for me. Zinnias are really good, especially about reblooming. They should continue blooming pretty much all the way up to frost as long as I keep them deadheaded, which is what it's called, to remove the spent flowers before they set seeds. So you can see the potatoes aren't looking amazing, but we'll just keep an eye on this and see what happens. Now over here, let's look at the back of this tomato bed that we looked at before. Here's another zinnia, not blooming yet. More poppies. I've got a couple celery plants. This one, not sure what's going on with these leaves here. Aside from that, overall, these celery plants look decent. I've got some carrots here, which the plants themselves look good. I did have sporadic germination. You can see I planted carrots all in this row, and they didn't fully germinate. I did, when I originally planted them, move the mulch to the side because carrot seeds are so tiny that if I just planted them right in the mulch, they probably would have trouble germinating past the mulch. Here I've got some bush beans, which are actually flowering, as you can see. These are a purple variety of bush bean, and thus they also have purple flowers. Now, sometimes bush beans, even though they're bush beans and not really supposed to climb, occasionally they will. As you can see, this one is climbing up my tomato trellis. And this one is looking for something to climb. So these should produce beans for me really quickly. And then, well, here, let's take a look at these nasturtiums that just started blooming. Very lovely, subtle one. And look at this one. This bloom is kind of on the way out, but look at that beautiful dark color. This one's really lovely. These were from a mix packet. I think it was the Jewel Mix. And then over here on this side of the bed, got some zinnias. This one's just starting. My dill is looking lovely, although the flower head is kind of weighing this part down. So all throughout the garden, my dill is getting ready to flower. So I'm hoping that my cucumbers catch up and send up actually produce some cucumber fruits really soon. My main goal with growing the dill was that I would be able to use it to make dill pickles along with my cucumbers. And I can still use the foliage from the dill if the flowers don't bloom at quite the right time, but I do like to use the flower heads as well. So the tomatoes in this bed are they seem for the most part a little bit happier. They're taller, They look really lush. You can see, this is what I was referring to about signs of disease. So this, on this particular branch, is pretty advanced. I'm gonna have to come out and clip this branch off completely. So I did actually get some copper fungicide for these tomatoes, which is approved for organic gardening. So it is an organic treatment. Even being organic, I generally don't really like to use things like that. I try to use things like compost tea and just keep the plant as healthy as possible, just support the plant by providing all the nutrition and everything that it needs. This year though, the fact that the disease is starting so early, as I said, I do get tomato disease every year in my garden, but usually it happens once I've had a chance to harvest some fruit, and this year I haven't harvested anything yet. So I want to make sure that I am able to get a good harvest before this. I think it's some type of blight before it takes out my plants. So I am going to go ahead probably later this afternoon and apply some of that copper to the garden. So aside from the disease branches, these tomatoes actually look nice and healthy. You can see we do have some tomatoes in here. So we are definitely getting fruits. They're just quite a bit more behind than normal. So I'm not sure when I'll actually get to harvest those, but we should be getting some soon. So I say soon. I don't really mean soon because it's going to be a while before those tomatoes are ripe and ready to harvest, but we should be getting some tomatoes this season. So I've got these tiny watermelons that have sprouted. These are a bush variety of watermelon. They're very small. I'm not sure what they're going to do, but we'll keep them and see what happens. Got some zinnias. This one is just starting. This one's really lovely. So lots of different companion plants through here. Got my poppies. Now around the back here, this whole section really just needs to be, you can see I had lettuce growing here, which has all bolted, and there's lots of weeds that are just growing freely. So I think it's basically time to just go through this entire section, rip everything out, and replant. So I'm not 100% sure what I am going to replant there. I could try replanting lettuce and other greens. At this point in the season, it's pretty warm and I'm not sure how well it would germinate. Lettuce tends to not like to germinate when it's too hot. And even if it germinates, I'm not sure how well it will last. That being said, it could be worth a try. So I may replant some of that, or I may just come through and plant something entirely different. I'm open to suggestions. It is a little bit early here in Connecticut to be planting things for the fall garden, although it is definitely time to be thinking about that. So I should be thinking about that. Now across the walkway here, you can see my cabbages are looking really lovely. This one here is actually not all that far off from harvest. It'll get a little bit bigger, but this one is an early Jersey Wakefield, which is more of a cone-shaped cabbage. I don't know if you can really see, rather than a big round cabbage. Here I've got my Savoy cabbage. It's just starting to get a little bit of a head, so that's really exciting. And I've got some kales mixed in. The kale's all looking lovely. These beautiful red acre cabbages. These are a little bit slower to mature. That one looks really pretty there than these early Jersey Wakefield cabbages, but I'm excited to harvest these when the time is right. And I don't know, something about these red acre cabbages is just so beautiful. Really all of them. Cabbage is one of my favorite vegetable plants for beauty in the garden. And this isn't fully filled out, but hopefully soon we'll be able to harvest that. So as I've mentioned in the last couple garden tours when we took a look at the cabbage bed, I am still on the hunt for your tried and true, most delicious cabbage recipes. So let me know. Harvesting is actually not that far off when it comes to some of these cabbages, so let me know what you like to make with your cabbage. Now on these trellises here, you can see here we've got pole beans growing. So I have two different varieties. I have a purple potted pole bean here, and over here is a rattlesnake bean. This is a green, slightly flattened bean with purple streaks. Really delicious. So these are really just getting started climbing now, but by the end of the season, they should climb all the way to the top and meet in the middle, and it would be this beautiful, magical arch of beans, which I'm really looking forward to. And then the other trellises here, you can see this one also has beans. This is also the rattlesnake variety. These are a little bit farther ahead. I know it's kind of hard to tell when I have other plants mixed in, the beans have kind of grabbed one of my tomatoes and pulled it out here. And yeah, and then these are on the side, Vortex green beans. This is a rounded classic green bean, very long, very tender, very delicious. Probably my favorite if I had to choose, either this or the rattlesnake. Those are both really good. And then finally, on this trellis here, we have cucumbers, which these are a little way from yielding, but they are finally starting to take off a little bit now that we have the warm weather. So on this side, I have silver slicer cucumbers, and on this side over here, I have homemade pickles cucumbers. So you can see these are just starting to climb. The tendrils are just starting to grip the trellis. So when it comes to plants like these cucumbers and the pole beans, those plants are natural climbers, meaning they just want to climb on their own, and they will climb as long as you give them something to climb. Sometimes in the beginning of the season, I have to train them a little bit, kind of help them find the trellis to make sure that they're climbing the right thing. But once I get them started, they'll just take off and basically keep growing on their own. Now that's different than something like a tomato. So these tomatoes we looked at before, but we're going to go ahead and look at them again so I can show you what we mean. So tomatoes are a plant that we generally grow vertically, because if we let them just kind of left them to their own devices, they'd sprawl along the ground. They take up a lot of space, and a lot of the fruit would be on the ground and not necessarily, most of it would rot or get eaten by insects before we had a chance to use it. So for that reason, tomatoes are generally grown vertically. It also helps prevent the spread of disease. But you can see that I have these clips here. So tomatoes are not natural climbers, meaning even though it's a vine, it's a sprawling vine, not a climbing vine. So if we want to grow our tomatoes vertically, we're going to have to trellis them in some way. So some people use tomato cages. That's not my preferred way to grow tomatoes upright, although you'll see that I do have some tomato cages in the garden. There's some situations where I made the judgment call that for that situation, at least temporarily, it's the best choice. My preferred way is to grow tomatoes on a wall like this. You'll see I do also have some tomatoes that I'm growing on stakes. So, all kinds of different trellising options in my garden. But yeah, I do definitely recommend growing tomatoes vertically, but they need a little bit of help. Now along the edge of the cucumbers, I've got to come out and harvest chamomile. You can see that this is abundant and beautiful. And I love these little alyssum flowers. I like to line the edge of my beds with these alyssum. You can see little nasturtiums. A lot of these are, fairly new and not flowering yet, but they will catch up. So interestingly, my cucumbers this year, if you've been following along with me the past couple years, you know that I've had some issues with cucumbers. Cucumbers I prefer to direct sow, partly because the plants prefer that. They don't like to have their roots disturbed. So as opposed to something like a tomato or a pepper that I would normally start inside, I like to start my cucumber seeds directly in the ground. The plants prefer that, and it makes things easier for me. When you don't have to, whenever I have the option to start a plant outside rather than baby it along inside, I like to take that option because it's so much easier. And cucumbers also grow quickly enough that they don't really need the head start. All of that being said, I have had issues the past several seasons with something, I think probably slugs, eating my cucumber seedlings as soon as they sprouted. So even though I prefer to start my cucumbers directly outside, I had been having to get them started, basically grow them to a large enough size that they could withstand a little bit of slug damage before getting them out here. And this year we started some cucumbers together in little pots on my deck. I also started them in the ground because I always give that a try every year just in case. And what I found was that this year, the slugs for the most part didn't bother my seedlings. I think they did nibble at a couple of them, but for the most part they left them alone. The seedlings are growing, and so all the seedlings that we started together on my deck, I found another spot for them. So they are growing in another part of the garden. But it's very interesting that this year I was prepared, and this, of course, was the year that I didn't need to have my backup started seedlings. So over here across the walkway, I've got my broccoli. You can see most of these heads have been harvested. These broccolis are starting to produce side shoots now. You can see the main head was harvested here, and I've actually harvested a bunch of side shoots already, but it is producing more. And you'll see throughout the garden, the same is true of most of my broccolis. This one was just harvested the other day, so this should start producing side shoots at all of these joints really soon. Here's one. This one has a tiny head, but I haven't harvested this one yet. This one here, I think, is my Romanesco. I think I only had one plant of Romanesco this year. We can't really see inside it that well. I don't want to damage the plant, but we're going to keep an eye on that because I'm really excited to harvest that. So Romanesco, depending on who you ask, you know, it's kind of partly between a broccoli and a cauliflower. Depending on who you ask, it might be classified as a broccoli or it might be classified as a cauliflower. So I'm growing it with my broccoli. And this is my third year trying to grow it. The last 2 years, wasn't able to harvest anything from it, which was kind of disappointing because I was very excited to try it. This year, it looks like, assuming that's my Romanesco plant, which I think it is, my labels got mixed up, which is why I don't know for sure. So I should be able to harvest something from that. Hopefully, we'll see if the weather holds and we'll see if the plant continues growing. So I'm really excited about that. So I do keep my broccoli growing after I harvest the main head because in my experience, at least the varieties that I grow produce lots of side shoots, which means that even after you harvest the main head, you can come out and every few days pick some of these and therefore keep your broccoli harvest going quite a bit longer. Now on the end of the bed here, you can see my lovely snapdragon is blooming. That's so beautiful. And this plant has lots of other flowers that have not opened yet. I've got a pretty little cosmos here and some poppies. And this is what the poppies will look like when they bloom. Very lovely. So this is the Lauren's grape poppy variety, which I grew last year for the first time and thought it was really lovely. So I grew it again this year. Some of these plants are actually volunteers that reseeded themselves from the poppies I grew last year, and some of them I did start. We actually winter sowed these seeds together. So this is only the second year that I've tried winter sowing poppies, but they've done really well both years that I've done that. In the past, I have really struggled with getting poppies to germinate. It seemed very hit or miss. So the past 2 years, I have winter sown them, and they've done great. So I think that's going to be my go-to poppy starting method for the future. So across the walkway, these are my sauce tomatoes, and you can see there are some signs of disease on these as well. So these will have to be treated. And these are blooming, and we should be getting lots of tomatoes. This is probably actually my hardest hit tomato patch when it comes to disease. So the tops of the plants look healthy. So I'm going to keep on growing these, and we'll just try our best to keep disease at bay. So let's head over this way. And here is my cherry tomato patch. This one, I've got to say, is struggling a little bit compared to cherry tomato patches that I've grown in the past. We do have some lovely tomatoes. Lots of tomatoes here on several of the plants. Got some here too. Now, I don't think my cherry tomatoes are as far behind as my large slicer tomatoes, but actually the cherry tomatoes on my deck this year look quite a bit better. The plants look healthier, and the plants that are producing tomatoes, I think I'm actually seeing more tomatoes from those plants, but the ones down here will still get a delicious harvest from, and hopefully really soon. Now across the walkway here, this is my final slicer tomato bed in this garden. And you can see we've got zucchinis growing in the front, which are just starting to get buds. So hopefully, zucchinis, once they actually flower, produce their fruit really quickly. So once these flower, I should have zucchinis really soon. You can see this poppy flower is on its way out. Got some bush beans here, some baby lettuce. And as you can see, more signs of tomato disease, so that definitely has to be treated. I find that this tomato bed of all of them has probably struggled the most, not as much with disease. I know I mentioned that my sauce tomatoes had disease. This tomato bed was overtaken in the last garden tour. A lot of these tomatoes were kind of being smothered by bolted arugula, which we'll get to that in a minute, but you'll see that that's mostly been pulled out. So I'm hoping that they will recover now that that's gone. So let's walk around back there and take a look. This was my lettuce bed. You can see that this lettuce is really bolting, and we can still eat it and harvest it at this point, but it is bitter. So while I still harvest it here and there when I need it in something, for example, yesterday we had basically a pasta chicken salad for dinner that called for lettuce to be mixed right in with the pasta, and we put this bolted lettuce in there, and it tasted completely good that way. If you're just going for a plain salad, it's not really going to have that fresh, delicious spring sweetness that I really like in lettuce. So pretty soon this is going to get pulled out and replaced with Possibly more lettuce, possibly something else. I'm not sure yet. So you can see on this end of the bed, I had arugula and other Asian greens that had bolted. Those were coming through the fence and really smothering my tomatoes. So I'll try not to lose my footing as I navigate through here. So I pulled those out. I did replant these with lettuce seeds. So as I mentioned, lettuce does not always like to germinate in the heat. So we'll see how that does. Here I did leave this particular arugula variety. This is wild arugula. This hadn't really, well, it is probably starting to bolt. It hadn't flowered yet, and I think this would still be edible. So I left this. This also wasn't growing into the tomatoes and causing an issue, so this is allowed to stay. So I planted several rows of lettuce through here, and we'll see what germinates and what doesn't. When I pull up this lettuce here, I may try to plant more lettuce and see. Normally, planting lettuce at the end of June in my area would not really be usually successful. This year has been so weird weather-wise that I don't really know what to expect, so I may as well go ahead and try it and see, and maybe we'll be able to actually keep lettuce going all summer. So I'm not really sure. This, as I said, it's been a weird year. We've had really intense heat wave, and we've had a lot of cold, so I'm not really sure what to expect. Now across the walkway here, this is my mixed brassica bed, primarily kale. These are really lovely. So we've harvested some of these so far. There's still lots to go. Here I've got cauliflower, which I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it or not on the camera, is just barely starting to head. You can kind of see it in there, the beginnings of a cauliflower head, which I'm really excited about. So I've got two varieties of cauliflower. This end is one variety, and on this end here is another variety of cauliflower mixed in with all of the cabbage and kale. Now this kale that is flowering is actually kale from last year that overwintered, and I am letting it flower because I want to harvest seeds from it. This is the Red Russian variety, and I was low on seeds for this variety, so I'm hoping to be able to harvest those. What I probably should be doing is harvesting this kale pretty extensively, and even if I don't need it, I can always freeze it to use in the winter. And then replanting kale, probably not out here, but starting transplants of kale inside in my house to replace for the fall. It has really been my experience, though, that kale that I start for the fall tends to not really do as well. So it's probably a timing issue. I probably don't have my timing quite right with that. So if you are in Connecticut, incidentally, please let me know your secret of fall kale. What I usually end up doing, though, is keeping my summer kale going all year. And then I don't necessarily harvest as much in the summer because it has a more intense flavor. Now, as I said, I was planning to harvest some of this and freeze it. Then if I crumble it into soups over the winter, I find that the stronger flavor is perfectly fine that way. But I wouldn't necessarily harvest it for fresh eating in the middle of summer. But I may keep this going and just have this be my fall kale as well. I'm not sure. I'm still kind of deciding, so let me know your thoughts. Now across the walkway here, this is my final bed in this section of the garden. Beautiful Picotee Cosmos has just started blooming. We've got lots of parsley, got some calendula in here. Over here, my leeks. I'm not really sure what to expect from these, but I mean, they look like they're doing well to me. I don't have a lot of experience with leeks, but we'll keep those going and see how they do. So that's the main garden. We're gonna head on over to the side yard garden. Let's stop and look at these petunias and planters. This is the first time I've ever tried starting petunias from seed, and these are lovely. So I think I'm going to start some of these every year. I just have these little planters on the edge of my walkway here, and I think they really add something. So it's not quite raspberry season here in Connecticut yet, but we're getting really close. You can see I've got lots of fruit. Not ripe yet, but it shouldn't be too long, and I'm really looking forward to that. So here behind me, you can see the side yard garden. I did get a question in my last garden tour about the different gardens I have, the fact that my garden is kind of spread out and I have garden beds in different places. And I said that I would try my best to answer that in this video. Yard garden is a new expansion to the garden that we actually put in, I think 2 years ago now. Time goes by really fast. So the main garden, basically the whole area that we already toured, that's the garden that I started with. And I found over time that it wasn't really enough for the plants that I wanted to grow. We had this whole side yard. I actually did a vlog a couple years ago when I was deciding what to do with this garden area, where I talked a little bit about that, so I can link that below if you're interested in the process. I also have a video where I basically showed the process of just making this garden, so I can link that as well if you're interested. So basically over time, I just needed more space for the garden, and the main garden didn't have any more space that it could expand to. So I eventually just started this completely new garden, and also it kind of gave me a chance to, with the main garden, there were some mistakes I made because that was the first real garden that I ever really had. And there were some things that I wanted to do differently. So when I started this garden, it gave me a chance to kind of fix some of those mistakes and just try things in a little bit of a different way. So I really like that. Now, as we head into the garden, you can see this is where some of those extra cucumber seedlings that I mentioned ended up. We've got lots of lemon balm here too. These I actually just stuck in the ground, and these are more seedlings that just, I basically direct sowed, except I think a couple of these may have been transplants. I can't remember, probably the ones that are a little farther along. And mixed in here, we've got some cucumbers, more cucumbers. These should climb up this fence. In the past, I've grown cucumbers on this fence from time to time, and they've done really well. So I'm guessing between these and the cucumbers in the garden, we should have an abundant cucumber harvest this year. So let's head on into this main garden area. So this garden here, honestly, really, all the gardens in my yard is pretty shady. Now, a lot of where I put the vegetable garden, I tried to pick the sunniest part of the garden, and it's kind of right on the edge of what would be considered full sun. In the height of summer, during like the brightest part of the year, I would say it's considered full sun, but barely. So I would get significantly more yield if I had more sun. But, that wasn't really something that I could control. I chose the sunniest spots that I could, but even with that being said, my tomato plants would do better with a couple more hours of sun a day, I think. So speaking of tomato plants, we have some tomato plants here, and these are looking really nice. Actually, this bed here, you can see that these tomatoes are kind of farther along than a lot of the other tomatoes that we've looked at, specifically this one here. This is a black from Tula tomato, and I find that it's looking really nice and healthy, which is not to say that there are not signs of disease, because these tomato plants have been affected by the same blight that's affecting all the tomatoes. Well, I shouldn't say all the tomatoes. It's affecting some of the tomatoes in my garden, and, kind of frustrating. These tomato plants were actually the plants that I planted a little bit early. I think I put that in a video. I'll go ahead and search for it and link it below if I did. I'm pretty sure I did. We kind of took a little bit of a risk. Before my last frost date had officially passed, we came out here and we planted these tomatoes, and I knew I was taking a risk. I talked about that in the video, and also what my plans were in case we did get an unexpected late frost. But as you can see, these tomato plants have been in the ground for a few more weeks than the other plants in the main garden, and they do seem quite a bit larger. That being said, I'm still not seeing a lot of fruit on these tomatoes, but they do have quite a few flowers, and I'm hoping that soon we will be getting fruit from these. So here we've got another one of these salmon rose zinnias. I really think this is beautiful. So let's walk through here. We've got a couple pepper plants in pots here. Now on this trellis, I have struggled with the trellises in this garden. I have a few Kajari melons here, which you can see are getting nibbled on. So these really need some heat and sunshine to catch up, and hopefully they will be able to do that. On this side of the trellis, I planted some Vortex green beans, and you can see these are struggling too. This one looks pretty decent, and this one looks okay. This one is mostly eaten, and this one actually might make a comeback. I've had beans that look worse than this actually make a comeback before. But I mean, that's all we have there. Just, I think, 4 plants. So I've mentioned before that my plan with the reason I planted these Vortex green beans over here was to keep them isolated from my other bean varieties, to hopefully be able to save seeds from them. Now, I do think that they'll catch up. I do think that we will get not a great harvest from them, but because my goal from these is seeds and not necessarily fresh eating beans, I think that we probably will get enough. We'll see. But I'm not sure. I actually am wondering, I used wood chip mulch in my garden for the first time this year, and I'm wondering if maybe the slugs don't really like crawling on the wood chip mulch. It probably doesn't feel great to them. So I'm wondering if that is actually what has protected some of my seedlings. So over here in the asparagus patch, while I have the walkways mulched, I don't have this mulch with wood chips. So I'm wondering maybe that's why these are getting eaten. So just something to consider and think about. So here's my asparagus. I have had a lot of trouble with this asparagus patch. We've talked about that at length. And I think right now my best plan for tackling this is still what we talked about in the previous garden tour, where I may end up digging out these asparagus roots in the fall while they're dormant, putting in a raised bed with landscape fabric at the bottom so that nothing can get in, and then replanting them. So, I have a few months to decide. That's what I'm leaning towards at the moment, though. Now we've got another tomato bed here. These, similarly, are looking good. You can see some little signs of disease at the base of the plant, but overall these are looking healthy. And again, very frustrating this year. I'm just not seeing fruit. I'm not sure what it is. The plants are flowering, not as much as I would like, but they are flowering. So I'm not sure why we're not getting fruit set. And then you can see down here we've got some basils of various types. Beautiful nasturtium here. This is the Alaska salmon nasturtium. It's got these beautiful variegated leaves and that lovely pastel, basically apricot colored flower. And my sweet potatoes that I planted here as an experiment to kind of mulch my tomatoes. We'll see how these do. They don't really look like much yet, but I can actually see some signs of growth. A lot of times when you plant sweet potatoes, you won't necessarily see significant growth at first. They're just setting roots down. Once they set their roots down, then they will grow at an alarming rate and vine out and really take over. So I'm just waiting for that to happen. And then you can see just more tomatoes back here. And then across the walkway here, I've got my sprouting broccoli. And I think this is probably kind of winding down now, but I do have some sprouts that I should come out and harvest. So this has been really delicious. Last year was the first year that I have tried growing sprouting broccoli, and we have really been enjoying it. Last year I just threw a couple plants in the ground as an experiment. This year I did grow a larger number of plants. I have found, I did mention the lack of sunlight in this garden over here as being a little bit of an issue. I also have some sprouting broccoli growing in a green stalk on my deck container garden, and that has been doing significantly better because it gets more sun. Now these have still been yielding well. I've still been happy with them, and we've still been harvesting quite a bit. So these were definitely worth growing, but I think that the sun does make a big difference. So down at the other end of this bed, shockingly, I have more tomato plants. Tomatoes, in case you have not guessed, are my favorite vegetable to grow in the garden. I find that I just love a fresh summer tomato. It's so good. And then on the end of the bed here, we have peas on this trellis, which I say on the trellis pretty generously because as you can see, they're really not fully on the trellis. And over here we have peas on both sides. Now what I did do, these peas are actually, they won't be yielding much longer. You can see they're already seeing signs of drying up. These don't really go very long into summer. I have planted some little pumpkins on the end of the bed here. And the idea is that when these peas come out, these pumpkins will be basically ready to climb. So these are Winter Luxury, which are like a sugar pie pumpkin basically. And so it's a smaller pumpkin. Should climb the trellis, and hopefully we should get some delicious pumpkins from those. And then on this end, I've got some of these Winter Luxury pumpkins as well. Here's my garlic. You can see the scapes are gone. I came out and harvested all these garlic scapes. Oh, missed one here. We'll go ahead and bring this in when I'm done filming. And these will be ready to harvest the garlic bulbs probably in a few weeks to a month or so. Over here, I have my blackberries, which you can see. These are getting ready for a lovely blackberry harvest as well. So it'll be a little while before these are ready, but I look forward to that. Along the blackberry fence here, You can see they're very small, but I have planted some miniature pumpkins, and those should climb the fence, and hopefully that will be a nice little bonus harvest. So while the miniature pumpkins that I planted are edible, some of them actually are supposed to taste actually quite good. That's not really why I'm growing them. I'm growing them because this is kind of an extra space. I didn't really need any more climbing crops because I have plenty of space for my beans, plenty of space for my cucumbers, everything like that. So I decided to just throw some little mini pumpkins up here. They should climb, and we'll use them for fall decorating, and then I will eventually give them to my chickens as a delicious treat. And then here's my strawberry patch. We have actually had quite a good harvest of strawberries this year. The strawberries I think are pretty much done. Might be able to find a couple here and there, a couple little stragglers. You can see one under there. But for the most part, strawberries are done for the season. This is a June bearing variety, so it will not bear all season. It just bears for a few weeks in June. And I've been really happy actually with what we've harvested this year. So thank you so much for joining me today on this morning walk through my garden. I hope that you enjoyed hanging out with me and checking on the progress of this vegetable garden. I love to film these videos. I think I've been filming them about every 2 weeks this summer. And one thing I really love about filming them is I can see so much progress and so much change between the videos. Even when, as I'm checking on the garden every day, or honestly, usually multiple times a day, you know, sometimes when you check on it that much, you don't necessarily notice the change. But when I look back at a video that I filmed a couple weeks ago, I can see a big difference. So I hope that that is encouraging to you as well. So thank you so much for joining me this morning. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.